can kind of really like isolate these types of users in audience segments, and you can then hook that up to things like Google Ads and market out to them.
Jake, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, yeah, thank you for inviting me. Really excited to be part of this.
Now, we're going to be talking about GA4, Google Analytics 4, a lot today. Before I carry on and let you intro yourself and so on, just wanted to mention to everyone listening that we've actually got a free video GA4 course available now, which Jake helped us put together. So if you hang around till the end, I'll tell you about that too. Now, Jake, I really wanted to get you on because GA4, I think, has been a thorn in a lot of people's side recently. Obviously, Google are forcing everyone to move over to it. It's been a bit of a learning curve. I must admit, even for me, I still struggle in some areas. You, I know, have done a lot of implementations and you've worked with it a lot and you work with it in your day-to-day. So it would be if you start with a little intro about yourself, and then we can dig into some of the benefits, some of the cons, because I know there are some, but it would also be great to dig into some actionable tips and just have a chat about how people can get the most from it, because people are going to have to switch as of July 1st, I think.
Definitely, the time is coming. The countdown's on. Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah, I can give an intro about myself first. So yeah, I'm Jake from Brighton, born and bred. And yeah, I started my career in analytics about 10 years ago, which is really scary, from my maths degree, Brighton Uni. And yeah, I started off at FMG, where obviously we sort of know each other from. And since then, I've been doing a lot of like GTM implementations, using GA on a daily basis, like Universal Analytics back then. And I've worked both agency and in-house as well. So my previous role for 2 years, I was working at an amazing agency, and I was working for like Google every day. So it's really cool. As a marketing analyst, I was looking at their data on the Google Store, looking at their like marketing channel activity, reviewing that, putting reports together, and really utilizing GA as much as I could for the Google team and working with them really closely. And then today, 6 months, I've been working at Salesforce. So I'm a marketing analyst at Salesforce, and they also own Slack and Tableau as well. So I get to really dive into Salesforce, Slack and Tableau data as a marketing analyst, and yeah, looking at their marketing channel activity as well. And yeah, I love it. It's amazing, and yeah, bring on the next 10 years hopefully. Marketing analytics.
And I guess everything you're doing from an analytics perspective is GA4 now.
Yeah, so most of my GA4 experience was from when I worked at the agency with Google. So sort of, utilizing that GA4 data for their marketing activity. Now at Salesforce, we're still sort of like using UA, but they're in the middle of that transition. And I still sort of like dive into some GA4 accounts as well. So yeah, really looking forward to like what's coming with GA4. And I know there's been a massive like learning curve, which we can talk about as well. But yeah, that's about it for my background essentially.
Yeah, I think with a lot of things like this, anything new, when things like Facebook have changed their news feed or something like that, people always kick up a stink and then they get used to it and it's all fine. I think the thing with GA4, it's been such a huge learning curve and it's so different. So there's not just the fact that you're potentially losing that data from UA, and people that have implemented really late might be losing some of that year-on-year data. But I think with it being so different, it's it's just really hard for people to transition what they're used to doing and checking to then, oh, I've just got to learn this from scratch. How have you, I mean, first of all, I guess, how have you found GA4 and what's your opinion on it now? Because from an analyst perspective, you probably have a different view to someone like me that's just diving in now and then and, you know, trying to get the most from it, whereas you're using it a lot.
Definitely, yeah. So I think the way like the data structure is obviously is completely different shift in like how the data is structured. So for me as an analyst, I'm quite used to like doing a lot of like SQL queries and stuff. So the way that GA4 works in terms of like the events data is kind of what I'm used to. So for me, it was actually great to see them shift from like the session scopes and all the sort of like nested data into this new event format. And it's actually quite exciting I think for me and probably other analysts like me to see that we can now use like sort of like flat event structured data in GA4. Whereas I think people who aren't used to that sort of like raw SQL data and looking at data in that way, maybe like marketers, for example, who, as you say, like sort of jump into UA and just get a report. I think it is it's a massive shift in thinking, and I would maybe strongly recommend if some people still haven't quite grasped that yet, maybe trying to get an understanding of how the data actually works in the background. So what is actually the difference between this nested data in UA and the raw sort of unstructured data in GA4? Sort of getting an idea of like how that structure is different would maybe help to understand sort of how it's coming in differently, if that makes sense.
I know some of that is touched on in that video course at the beginning about how it all works on events now, but do you just want to go through that briefly, how it's different and how it's now everything in there is events?
Yeah, definitely. So in GA4, everything that happens, as you say, is an event. So if someone views a page, that's no longer a page view, it's actually just an event. And the name of that event is page view. And then if something else happens, like if someone scrolls or clicks a call to action, that's also an event. So everything that's happening is just like event after event after event. And that makes it, from my perspective, so much easier to look at like patterns in behavior or like sequences, because you can kind of like tie those events together much easier. Whereas in Universal Analytics, you had like a lot of different scopes and things were like session based, and it was all like kind of obviously what everyone was used to, but it wasn't quite like a flat structure. I'm not sure if that was the right word. But yeah, it was kind of a bit like all nested and made to like look pretty for UA. Whereas now everything's kind of like flat and it's event after event after event. And these events have things called parameters as well. So you can attach like specific bits of information to each of these events. So for example, there's if you're purchasing something, you can have up to 25 parameters for that purchase event, which would contain information like the color, the size, country, just like loads of extra information, which allows it to be like analyzed so much easier. I'm not sure if that's kind of like a brief overview of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I was going to talk about negatives of GA4 and the benefits of GA4, but I'm going to switch those around. Maybe start with the benefits, because it sounds like that might be quite a strong benefit.
Sure. Yeah. I think like that was definitely one of the top benefits for me. Just allowing you to stitch that data together so much easier. So, for example, like one of the reports in GA4 is like the path analysis, and you can kind of like tie events together and see what events people are doing like directly after one another, and even like sequences. You can build sequences based on what events people are doing in a specific order. Whereas in UA, that was like, you could kind of still do it, but it was very limited because not everything was an event, and then you had like session-based things, and it was kind of a bit messy. Then things would sample because like data would just it's kind of not as clean. Whereas in GA4, the way the data kind of like flows together, it just makes it run much more smoothly, and that's why you kind of get like unsampled data in GA4 as well. So yeah, I think that's a key benefit from my point.
Yeah, I guess some of this stuff takes quite a bit of setup, but once you've got it in there, it's kind of, it's there. So I guess it's just going through that first phase.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the setup even, God, it sounds like I'm trying to sell people GA4 or something, but the setup of GA4 is a lot easier as well, because it does automatically track some things. So it will automatically track like the clicks as well that happen on your site, and you can turn this on and off as well. And it will automatically track like scrolling. There's a few other things, but you can kind of like just toggle that on and off within the GA interface rather than having to set everything up as well. So yeah, even the setup is just so much easier and cleaner.
What about things like e-commerce tracking? Because I know I was on the phone to you a while back because I was having a bit of a headache with that. Do you think that's trickier than UA? And do you think you need to be using Tag Manager now with GA4 implementation?
I think I'm not sure if, from my perspective, I'm not sure if too much has changed with the e-commerce setup, because all of the information is kind of similar to what it's tracking now. You can actually, I would strongly advise using GTM anyway for any GA4 implementation. And if you are using GTM, then you can very easily use your UA setup, so your UA e-commerce setup. So if your UA e-commerce setup is already tracking, you can very easily in GA4 just kind of like rename some of the fields which are coming through to the new GA4 e-commerce fields. And you can do that all yourself, hopefully within GTM, and it should essentially work fine. So yeah, if you're using GTM with sort of UA already, transitioning that e-commerce over to GA4 should be quite easy. And if you're not using GTM, I strongly recommend maybe looking into that.
Yeah. And I think there's some Google documentation as well, isn't there, that shows you what those name changes are. So it just kind of maps things across.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I can't remember exactly what they are, but yeah, it's kind of just
we'll find it and link to it in the show notes, because it's probably useful to some people, I think.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Would you say, so I mean, obviously that's the event stuff does sound like it's not obvious to start with, but it does sound like a big benefit. Can you think of any other major benefits over UA?
Yeah, there's quite a cool few, I think, features. I think one of the major benefits is like consent mode. So I don't know how much you know of this, but you can kind of I think it's actually built in automatically through GTM at the moment, but it kind of detects if you're using like the consent banners and stuff, it automatically kind of blocks anything those users are doing, but GA4 will actually upscale the data for you. So it will kind of look at these cookieless anonymous pings which are being blocked by these consent banners, and it will then estimate sort of the traffic and conversions off of these cookieless pings. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but basically what I'm trying to say is, even though some people are not consenting to your data, GA4 uses a behavior model to kind of predict what those users are doing. Whereas in UA, if you're using a consent banner, you just lost all that data. So none of that. So if 50% of your traffic are not consenting, you've just automatically lose 50% of the data in UA, whereas in GA4, you'll still get that data come through based on them sort of knowing how many people are not consenting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do they predict that? Like, so how accurate is it? Are they just basing it on other users' behavior?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, but yeah, they know how many people aren't consenting, and then yeah, I assume they're kind of like looking at because they're looking at the models, like, I don't know, the past 30 days or something, and then kind of predicting what those conversions are.
Okay, yeah, no, I didn't know that. That's yeah, I suppose even if they are predicting it, it's better than not having that data at all, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's just one of the cool things. And there's a few other things like anomaly detection. I can't say that word. But again, this is based on like a model, like a behavior model, and you can set this model to like the last 30 days, and it will automatically tell you if like one of your days is an anomaly. So for example, if you're kind of got like page views tracking steadily, and then one day all of a sudden you have like double the amount of page views, it will automatically recognize that that's not quite right based on the last 30 days, and it will label that as an anomaly. And then you can also set email alerts. So you can set email alerts if yesterday you saw an anomaly in one of your metrics, you'll then get an email alert. So if you suddenly saw, a massive increase in page views or transactions or PDF downloads, or maybe you saw a drop to like from 1,000 to 2, then you'll get an email alert based on that. Whereas in UA, you couldn't do anomaly sort of like alerts. You can only really do those like if traffic drops then to 10% or below or something like that. Whereas now it's based on actual like behavior modeling, which is really cool.
Where is it? I haven't noticed that. Where is it?
I think you do that there's like in the admin. Okay. Yeah, so you can set that up as an email alert in the admin panel, and you can actually view anomalies I think it's like in the Explore reports, like when you're building a report, I think you can kind of get it to tell you whether like a specific point is an anomaly or not.
Yeah, so I guess you can set it up as a sort of dashboard in that Explorer report.
Yeah. So the Explorer report is like sort of the custom report section. So you can have a custom report that has that in it, and then you can make that shareable so that everyone who has access to that GA can view that.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know about that. That's really handy, actually.
Yeah, and there are some other really cool reports in that Explore section. Did you want me to talk about funnels?
Yeah, it'd be good. Yeah, the Explore, I think there's a little bit of a learning curve with the Explore section as well, isn't there? Because there's quite a bit to it. But yeah, it'd be good to talk about that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there are quite a lot of different types of reports in that Explore report, and I think it would be quite scary for someone at first. So I think if someone is looking into that, I think maybe just like trying a very basic like free form report at first, because that's just a very like table report, like one dimension, one metric, and you can kind of see the data. So I'd really recommend giving that a go first, and then moving on to maybe the thing I was going to talk about was funnels. And previously in UA, you could create like a funnel based on the page URL, and it was very like fixed. So if you'd made like a mistake in that, you then wouldn't quite get the right funnel. And you had people like dropping out of the funnel, but then re-entering, and the UA version was just a bit messy. And I think there was a better version of that in 360. However, now in GA4, you can kind of like drag and drop dimensions and metrics into this funnel, and you can create like segments for users at each funnel step. So you could say like maybe users who entered on the homepage and then reached a search results page, and then maybe like a product page or something. You can really like distinguish that funnel. And there are a few different options there as well. You can see like a trended funnel. So you can actually see that funnel over time in GA4, whereas you couldn't do that in UA, really. So yeah, I'd really recommend exploring the funnels section as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Is that a tricky setup, or is that fairly straightforward?
I think once you get familiar with like the events side of things, so like the event names and sort of how they're pulling through into your data, you can then maybe go into the funnel section and create the first step based on like a specific event, and then you can create the second step based on another event, and then you can create. So yeah, I kind of recommend you kind of have to have that knowledge of the like event sort of structure first, and then yeah, the next step is going to those explore reports, I think.
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like you're a fan of GA4, so it'd be interesting to know if if you think there's many negatives compared to UA.
So yeah, there are a few things which did sort of like annoy me when it first came out. So the first thing was like views. So I think this is probably something which a lot of people might miss. So in UA, obviously you could have views, which were like filtered versions of properties, and you essentially don't have that in GA4. There are things called sub properties, which I think are essentially views, but they're only available to 360 people. So if you haven't got 360, then yeah, you kind of only have that property level, and you can do some stuff to maybe look at, like, for example, creating like those custom reports in the explore section and having like specific reports for specific things. Or you can even customize the user interface a bit. So in the main reporting section, you can actually remove some of the reports and like drag some new like graphs in, and you can actually customize the metrics quite a lot. And that's visible to everyone. So you can create like new sort of reporting sections within the user face, which is visible to everyone, which you could kind of argue that is maybe a view, but it's not quite the same. So yeah, I miss that a lot. Yeah.
And anything else, or is that kind of the big bugbearer for you?
That's the main thing. The other thing, which is a bit annoying, I don't know if you maybe like use Looker Studio, which was Data Studio. So if you're hooking GA4 up to Data Studio or Looker Studio, they've now actually introduced quotas on that. So previously they didn't really have any limitations in how many times data would be pulled from UA to Data Studio, whereas now I'm not sure what the limit is, but it's not a lot. And I've kind of seen it where, like, even after viewing or like changing filters like 5 times, it just completely cuts off and the report just breaks, because it's like I've done 5 API calls and that's my limit reached for like the next 2 hours. So I know a lot of people have seen that issue, and it is something that is really annoying. So yeah.
Why do you think they've done that?
I think they might be pushing people to BigQuery more, or maybe they're just trying to get people to go to 360. I'm not sure if they have those quotas on 360.
Is that still ridiculous money?
I would assume so. Yeah. But yeah, there are ways.
Isn't for everyone, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, there are things you can do around that sort of like Looker Studio quota. But yeah, if you are looking to hook that up to Looker Studio, just be careful of those quotas, I think.
Yeah. It would be good to talk about some actionable stuff you can do in GA4, because I've spoken to you about this before. Just just simple tasks like looking into organic traffic coming into particular landing pages, and then what people are doing after that. I've been getting my head around that a lot more within GA4, whereas I think before, when it first got released, even just finding something like, well, where are people hitting my site? Even something like that was a real struggle. But then there's slightly more in-depth things. Like one of the things I mentioned to you was things like weighted sort, where I used to look at organic landing pages, order it by bounce rate, but then obviously everything would be 100% bounce rate and then one session. But then you switch it into weighted sort and you'd get the pages that are getting traffic, but they still got a high bounce rate. So you can then look at improving those bounce rates. So it's kind of quick wins like that. With GA4, it just seems trickier to get that, the actionable stuff out of it. So it'd be good to hear your view from someone who uses it a lot more on, things that kind of general users and marketers and people like that can do just to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I think I'm totally with you where like they've sort of taken away some things there which people were using, like which many people probably didn't know about. Maybe that's why they took them away. But stuff like that, I think you now have to kind of maybe, if you are using like Data Studio, you'd have to kind of do it there instead. I think there are a few things which I think are quite cool. I think it is limited in kind of what you mentioned there, and I would strongly recommend kind of where I mentioned earlier about customizing the user interface. So like creating specific reports, because you can really toggle like the metrics there, and there might be some metrics which are kind of like hidden at the moment in the main interface, which you might find in the background, which you can actually pull in. So I'd strongly recommend to anyone who maybe is limited at the metrics at the moment in the user interface, having a look at customizing that.
Just to confirm on that then, so that's not using the Explorer area, that's actually just going into your general reports, but customizing them for yourself.
Exactly, yeah. So in the main sort of reporting section, which everyone has the same view on. So if you are to customize it, everyone will see that. You can kind of like, drag in different sections, and you can change the tables and you can change the metrics pulling in. So for example, if you're not an e-com site, but there's always like, I don't know, purchase or like e-commerce revenue in one of the tables, you're never going to use that. So just edit it, take it out and swap it back with something which is a bit more useful. I think that's like something which I would strongly recommend. There are some other cool things which I think people could maybe try out. So especially if you're e-com, I don't know if you know much about the like predictive analysis side of things. So they do have some like metrics and audience settings. So you can kind of like create an audience based on people who are in the next 7 days likely to purchase, based on their like 30-day historical behavior, or people who are in the next 7 days likely to, they're like really close to purchasing, but they're likely to not, or you can even create an audience of people who were visiting quite frequently, but then in the past like 7 days they haven't visited. So you can kind of really like isolate these types of users in audience segments, and you can then hook that up to things like Google Ads and market out to them. So if you do have that example I used where people in the next 7 days are really likely to purchase, you can put a bit more extra spend against them, show them some ads maybe, and try and get them to just ensure that they do actually purchase. I think that's one really useful feature that people can sort of like take away if they're sort of like e-com and using Google Ads. They can really like utilize on that, and you can also actually create events based on user behavior. So for example, if someone if you've got a blog, and someone has viewed like 3 blog pages, you can then create an event off of that, like called like blog reader, and then you can use that event in the future as well with like your remarketing as well. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with this sort of like audience side of things, with like predictive analysis. And I'd strongly recommend people to start to like look at those a bit more. And there's a lot of like built-in audiences as well. So it's not really that complicated.
What sort of things are built in?
So all the stuff I mentioned there is actually built in. So like
cool.
People who haven't visited in 7 days, that's literally there at a click of a button. So you can create an audience off the back of that and then just remarket to them.
Is that just in the e-commerce report then?
There's actually you can go to like admin and then like audience, and then you can just like you go to like build audience.
Okay, got you.
And then you can just like build sort of an audience.
There's a few useful things tucked away in admin, isn't there? You don't normally think to go there.
Yeah, and I think they probably are available in the main reporting as well. I always just go to the admin bit. But yeah, there is loads of like really useful stuff to look at. It's kind of just getting used to it and just knowing what's there, and not being scared to try it out.
Yeah, it sounds good for e-commerce, especially. Are there any other? Can you think of any other general tips that people could use, maybe non-e-commerce related? So, general marketers who might be diving in on a daily, weekly basis, whatever it might be, that they can just get a bit more from it.
So yeah, actually, one of the things which I think some people who aren't typically like not necessarily e-com, but using like the main reporting feature suite might struggle with is kind of like digging into that further bit of an analysis. So one of the things on my con list was that. So it's quite hard to use like the search features within those reports. You can only really do like one search, and I think it's like a contained search, whereas in UA you could kind of like do like loads of different filters on top of each other, and you had like different options for those filters as well, like starting with or matches regex, and that's something I miss, and that makes it kind of quite difficult, I think personally, to dive into that sort of next level of your analysis in that sort of reporting suite. So I'd really recommend to, and I know I've kind of like said about this already, but the explore section, if you do use that freeform, which is the standard explore report, you can really like dive into your insights further. You can have like multiple dimensions, and you're not just limited to 2, which is in the main reporting bit. You can add in like multiple filters, multiple metrics. You can kind of like view them in a graph if you want, and that will really help you like identify any changes in your data that you want to explore further, rather than trying to use the reporting suite and like struggle with the number of filters you can use and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that is one recommendation I'd have at the moment. Using that explore.
I guess for people that want to do things they were doing in UA, or even things they wanted to do but couldn't do in UA, it's probably well worth everyone getting their head around the explore feature, but especially for those people, it's well worth getting their head around that feature, because it sounds like it's really flexible. It's just a bit of a learning curve, I think, isn't it?
Definitely, and what goes into that is like what I mentioned before, like the events and like how they work. Once you kind of have your head around the events data, which you'll probably see if you do use that explore report and you kind of put a few dimensions together, you'll see that data laid out a bit better. And yeah, I think, yeah, I'd really recommend getting your head around that.
Cool. Top of the list for most people, I think, getting their head around that.
Definitely.
Any other tips before we?
I think something I use quite a lot is like the real-time report actually, and kind of similar to that is like the debug view. So the debug view is specific to like if you're doing like an implementation, you can really see if you are using GTM preview mode, you can actually see your data specifically coming through for whoever's using preview mode in debug view, and it kind of like shows you exactly what events you're triggering and all the parameters that are tied to those events. And you can access debug view through the admin section. Yeah, if you're using preview mode in GTM, I really recommend using that debug view, and also just real-time view. So this is something that, yeah, anyone can access, and it shows you in the last 30 minutes like what events are coming through. So if you've maybe just launched a campaign, or like you've made a change on your site or made a change to the tracking, using that real-time view, I would strongly recommend to take a look at that.
Yeah, I've found that really useful already, just for checking events are working and things like that, because it pulls a lot through, doesn't it?
Exactly,
the real-time data.
Yeah.
Awesome. Before we wrap up, I said I'd mention the video course. So it's a free GA4 video course that's available. If you go to, and I'm sure I could have made this URL easier, but if you go to rankcaddy.io/free-GA4-course, I should have just left the hyphens out or just made it GA4, but it's free GA4 course with hyphens. So rankcaddy.io/free-GA4 course with hyphens, and you can get access to that, and that goes through setup and reporting and all sorts. So that's well worth a look. Jake, been really helpful, and yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Yeah, great to be part of this. Thank you so much for asking me.